Welcome to the Daily Coffee Pro by Mapper Forward, friends. I'm your host, Lee Safar, and today on the podcast, we are talking about the supply chain. This is the fourth in a 7-part series about how we are preparing customers, clients, consulting clients of Mapper Forward, how we're preparing them for the challenging times that are currently being experienced and we believe are going to be experienced for at least the next 2 years. We are sharing some of those tips with you in this series in the hope that you'll find them helpful. You ready? Let's do it. This podcast is brought to you by Mapper Forward's new Patreon community, the Global Coffee Think Tank. Check the show notes or head to patreon.com/Mapper Forward to find out how you can become a member today. Okay, so supply chain. Why is this such a big deal? Unless you've been living under a rock in the coffee industry, you will have heard about the logistical constraints that we're experiencing, as well as the issue that's happening with supply and demand economics of pretty much everything that is a commodity anywhere in the world. There's an added problem that has come to light this year, separate from the inflation that we've been warning about for the last 12 months. If you recently caught the conversation, the series that we did with Jonas, the agronomist from Brazil, you will have heard that was recorded a couple of days before the invasion of Ukraine. And you will have heard that inputs, so fertilizer and nitrogen and potassium and phosphorus, the input price for those inputs was up 300%. And that was because Russia was holding back the supply to Brazil during the pandemic. So Brazil sent an envoy to Russia to try and negotiate for the supply. Now, the supply wasn't just coming out of Russia, it was coming out of Ukraine as well. But Russia supplies Brazil with 60% of its fertilizer requirements for coffee, for corn, for soy, for all of the commodities the agricultural commodities that they farm. So while Brazil is a really huge producer of agricultural commodities that supply the world's food supply, they rely very heavily on inputs from outside of Brazil to make that happen. So if it was 300% before Russia invaded Ukraine, that number's going to go up. The reason it's going to go up is basic supply and demand economics. If Ukraine isn't able to supply the commodities like all of those things that we spoke about, if Russia is not able to supply those things because of the sanctions that have been put on them, what that ends up meaning is that the supply that comes from the rest of the world is going to be fought over by anyone who can afford to get access to them, which means that the price is going to go up. So there's a shorter supply with the same demand. And one could argue there will be increased demand because people will want to hoard. Different businesses are going to try and protect themselves as much as they can. So they'll buy as much as they can while the price is where it is, with the anticipation that the price will go up the longer that you wait. So you'll have people hoarding different inputs into ag farming. Now, the other thing that we're starting to see is, I heard a story from a producer the other day where fake fertilizers and fake inputs are starting to show up as a result of this issue with supply and demand. So what you're going to end up with is a couple of things. Producers, if they can't get their hands on as much fertilizer as they need, they will reduce the amount that they fertilize. And a number of producers have come out and said, we are just going to fertilize less. Some have come out and said, we're reducing our fertilizers by 50%. Others who are buying what they think is fertilizer and it's fake fertilizers, they're going to think that they're fertilizing at the normal rate, but it's fake. So it could be either all fake or just have very limited nutrients in it. Either way, it's a reduction in the way that they're feeding these trees. What all of this ends up amounting to is a reduction in yield. And so therefore there's less coffee. If there's less coffee in an already inflationary environment, what that means is before all of these challenges, the price of coffee was going up. The price of coffee was going up because of the C market. The price of coffee was going up because of expensive increased freight charges. It was going up because of transportation in country, customs clearance. All of these things have gone up, and that was before these issues were happening. Now they're going up even further, and there's going to be a reduction in yield. So if farming coffee gets more expensive and it becomes less available, that's going to drive the price up even more. You can take this for every other commodity that you use in your business. The flour that goes into the croissants that you buy, the milk that's being produced, the alternative milks that are being produced. If you have a food menu, you'll notice how expensive vegetables are. You'll notice how expensive grains are. You'll notice how expensive fruit has gotten, how expensive oats are. All of these things are going up in price. So we have two things that we need to manage as a business from this perspective. We need to manage the supply of it, and we need to manage the cost of it. Now, in the next episode, we're going to be talking about profitability. But how do you make decisions about whether the products that you're buying, the raw materials that you're buying, are worth sticking with the current supplier that you have, or is it time to go and find another supplier? This is where, if we go back to the first episode in this series, the business fundamentals play a really important role in your decision making. So having defined your business values helps you understand, is it time? Am I okay with just going to a cheaper supplier? Can I afford not to go to a cheaper supplier? Because I'm no good as a business if I can't survive. All of these little decisions are going to amount to big shifts in your business's trajectory. And so figuring out the balance between maintaining enough supply without having too much of it sitting on the shelf, eating up your cash flow, versus negotiating new prices with your suppliers that aren't so low that they can no longer sustain their business. Because if you lose the supplier, you're then going to be competing with other people for other suppliers' products. And how do you navigate that with regards to, is my supplier taking advantage of me, or is it time to go and find someone else? These are very real decisions that we are having to face with a lot of the clients that we're working with right now. It's going through every single supplier that they're working with, having them have conversations with their suppliers in anticipation of a reduction in the supply of commodities. Now, something that's really important to understand, there is coffee out there. Don't get me wrong. There is coffee that's out there. There is a reduced amount of coffee that's out there, and that will continue to happen. So it's not that you won't be able to get access to coffee. It's, are you willing to pay the amount that is required to get access to that coffee? And are your customers willing to pay the increase in price that's necessary to facilitate you being able to sell that coffee? And that's what we're going to talk about in the next episode. I hope you found this helpful. Peace, love, and peanut butter, friends. Have an amazing rest of your day.
Thanks, friends. If you enjoyed this video, here's what you should check out next. Consider supporting Map It Forward on Patreon, and be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell before you leave.